You're in a Roman courtroom. Now, you got to remember, they didn't have lawyers like we do today. They had orators, basically incredibly skilled public speakers. Your client is on trial for murder, but you have absolutely nothing, zero hard evidence to prove they're innocent. So what do? How do you possibly win? Well, if you were a master like Cicero, you wouldn't let a tiny little thing like facts slow you down. You'd do what any great showman does. You'd turn that trial into a total spectacle. You might bring in a bloody dagger as a prop, maybe even commission a dramatic painting of the crime scene to get the jury's emotions running high. You'd make your most important points rhyme so they'd stick in people's heads. You might even mock your opponent's haircut or how they walked. And if all else failed, you'd pull out the oldest trick in the book. You'd accuse your accuser of doing the exact same thing. See, it was never about logic. It was about grabbing the audience by the heart, not the head. Now, this wild courtroom drama, it's really just a small-scale version of a much, much bigger problem the Romans were facing. That same challenge, controlling what people think and feel in front of a jury, they had to do that on an empire-wide scale. I mean, that was the fundamental question, right? You've got this massive empire stretching all the way from Britain to the deserts of the Middle East. It's packed with different cultures, different languages, different gods. How on earth do you hold it all together? How do you convince all those people to feel, and more importantly, to act like Romans? Well, their solution was basically a masterclass in mass psychology. And their very first testing ground for these techniques, their public laboratory, was the courtroom. It's where they perfected the art of rhetoric, which is really just a fancy word for the art of persuasion, especially for those times when the truth just wasn't on their side. And guys like Cicero, they literally wrote the playbook on this stuff. His tactics were just brutally effective. He knew that if you just repeat a lie over and over again, it starts to feel true. He perfected mudslinging. Forget the actual issues, just attack your opponent's character. He'd use guilt by association, linking his enemies to people the public already hated. And he was a master of labeling, constantly tagging his side with positive, heroic words and the other side with negative, sinister ones. And check this out. What did Cicero do when he had no witnesses, no proof at all? He'd create the illusion of proof. He'd use these big, vague, but super powerful phrases like, "Everybody knows that." It makes his claim sound like just common sense, like something everyone already agrees on. It's a really brilliant way to just invent social proof out of thin air. But here's the thing. These psychological tricks weren't just for the high and mighty in the courtroom. The Romans had to manage the masses, the everyday people, and for that, they had the biggest stage in the world, the public games.
And this is where things get really weird and fascinating. If you look at Roman life, crowds at the theater, watching plays, they were constantly breaking out into riots. But at the Colosseum, where they're watching people get mauled by lions and gladiators fighting to the death, the crowds were usually calm, orderly even. I mean, how does that make any sense? Well, social psychology actually gives us a pretty clear answer.
It all comes down to one crucial concept: perceived legitimacy. You see, the spectators believed that the people being punished in the arena, the criminals, the prisoners of war, were outsiders who totally deserved what was happening to them. So this wasn't just mindless violence. It was a public ritual. It reinforced who was in charge, it strengthened everyone's shared identity as good Romans, and it created this incredibly powerful us versus them feeling that actually brought the crowd together instead of tearing it apart. Okay, so beyond the bloody spectacle of the arena, the Romans used even more direct, more powerful tools of social engineering to shape how the entire population thought and acted. You know how you sometimes hear people talking about the good old days? Well, the Romans basically weaponized that idea. Their leaders and writers were constantly pushing this narrative that their own society was in a state of moral decay, especially when you compared it to the mythical, perfect past of their ancestors. And what does that do? It creates this constant feeling of crisis, which makes it a whole lot easier to pass new intrusive laws meant to restore those so-called traditional values. And that led to these things called sumptuary laws. And they were all about micromanaging pretty much every part of a person's life. Seriously, they had laws about what kind of clothes you could wear, what food you could serve at a dinner party, how much you could spend on a funeral, even what kind of personal carriage you could ride around in. This wasn't just about money. It was about using the law to lock in the social hierarchy and stop what they saw as moral collapse. And maybe the most powerful, most ambitious psychological tool of them all was the imperial cult. I mean, think about it. To create one common identity across all these different cultures, they just made the emperor a god. Worshipping the emperor became this shared civic duty, a practice that connected a soldier in rainy Britain to a merchant in sunny Dacia. It bound them all together in a shared loyalty to Rome and its living, breathing symbol of absolute power. So, you might be thinking, okay, that's all fascinating ancient history. But here's the kicker. These techniques, this whole psychological playbook, it didn't disappear when the Colosseum crumbled. Not at all. In fact, it's alive and well, and it forms the foundation of a lot of modern persuasion. Just think about the last political attack ad you saw, the kind that doesn't talk about policy at all, but just relentlessly attacks a candidate's character, digging up some personal flaw, real or imagined. Yep, that's a 2,000-year-old strategy. That is pure Roman mudslinging, designed to make you dislike the person so you don't even listen to their argument. And it's the exact same story with Roman labeling. That simple trick of just attaching a positive or negative word to a group, that is the direct ancestor of modern political slogans and brand marketing. It's a quick, powerful shortcut to shape. So the Roman psychological playbook is anything but a dusty old relic. From the courtroom dramas to the grand spectacles of the arena, they built this incredibly sophisticated system for shaping belief and controlling behavior. It really seems that if you want to understand the ways people try to persuade us today, you first have to understand the Romans. The game hasn't changed, just the players.